I have played a lot of racing titles in my life, from the early console titles such as Sega Rally, even on an arcade machine, Lotus Challenge, to the latest in simulators like Assetto Corsa and R-Factor 2, but I have not seen a title that had as many split opinions of the title without reference to other titles as much as the predecessor to the one I am reviewing today. Welcome to Total Reviews, the web show where we take a look at games of interest and see if they really are worth a purchase, in partnership with Games Planet, where you can purchase games like my choice today from an officially licensed game seller. Today's episode is all about Project Cars 2, the second installment in the simulator or game series by Slightly Mad Studios. Released in October of this year, 2017, Project Cars 2 is a simulation-style racing title that is set out to fix the issues of the previous title and go about redefining the genre as its predecessor intended to do, with the latest generation graphics, sounds, physics and gameplay. Available on Xbox, PlayStation and PC. I will be, as usual, looking at the PC version of this title, but all of them will have very similar features in terms of gameplay as technology blurs the line between console and PC gaming. But before I continue with the review, it's time for the specs. Requiring at least a 3.5 GHz i5 3450 or 4 GHz AMD FX 8350 processor, 8 GB of RAM, a GTX 680 or equivalent graphics card, and 50 GB of storage space. The minimum requirements are actually fairly high, showing that this title will take a fair amount to play it. Recommended specs lean towards the likes of double the RAM, high-spec i7 processors and the latest GTX 1080 graphics cards, most certainly pushing as hard as they can to give you the most immersive and most complete experience. Entering the game, I was greeted with an intro that gave me a similar sense of intrigue as the intro in the original Project Cars. I have to admit, both were really well done, but I think the first one had a slight edge over this, maybe because I had already seen all the glamour in the first title. Going into the menus, I find the UI is simplified a lot over the first and seems to be a little bit more intuitive. The main menu is still annoying, just like it was in the original, but everything else seems to have become a little bit easier to use, and I can forgive them for not wanting to change the layout too much as not to turn away their original audience. That being said, the layouts of other titles, the UI of Gran Turismo Sport, Forza, Assetto Corsa is certainly a lot better than the main menu UI anyway, of Project Cars 2. But that's neither here nor there. You can get used to it. It does take a little bit of time, and I did find myself getting used to it after a while. Project Cars 2 comes with a staggering number of locations and vehicles, with over 60 locations from the Mercedes-Benz ice testing track to the wonderfully dangerous Nurburgring, and numerous racetracks around the world, plus sections of the Pacific Coast Highway. You can really enjoy driving in many different ways. Those 60 locations also further expand into some 130 plus layouts, meaning there really is something for everybody. That includes historic racing. I think I saw on there a Spa Francorchamps in the old layout, the old Silverstone layout. You've got, of course, the Nürburgring Nordschleife, and there are a number of classic tracks that are available for people to be driving on. So definitely a lot of locations and a lot of variations on the tracks. With the cars, it's a similar case. There are various types of vehicles, ranging from go-karts right the way up to what seem to be modern F1 cars dubbed Formula A for licensing reasons. Supercars are plentiful, as are different types of racing vehicles spanning various eras. All in all, there is a lot here to rival other simulators such as, again, Assetto Corsa, R-Factor, and the likes of even iRacing, or though iRacing I suppose is more for multiplayer, but even things like Gran Turismo and Forza, for the simple reason that I think Project Cars possibly has more class-oriented racing than any of those other titles, and I think that's really nice because you can have great multi-class racing which is available in Project Cars, and it's not just going to be limited to 2 or 3 vehicles. They have a full range, which is brilliant. It did take me a little time to pick my first car though, and the track, because the car list exceeds 180 fantastically reproduced vehicles. Getting into free practice, I decided to follow along the same route that I had in the original to judge this title. Setting the practice session up was easy enough, and I like being able to set up some weather settings to change the weather in the session. Dynamic weather is almost a must now in this age of sim racing, and it has to be done well, which I feel that Project Cars has managed to get going very well. In fact, from the first title, this seems to be merely refined. All they did is refine that setup, as it was really good there too. And knowing what my initial impressions were from the first title, I went into this quite tentatively, but I have to admit that they really have fixed a lot of problems that I found on the first. Leaving the garage, I found that my first force feedback was feeling pretty solid, and whilst it wasn't the best, it was certainly giving me a good feeling of the road. I understood what the car was doing on the road. This is very important. Any sim racer who races with a wheel is going to tell you how important the likes of force feedback are, to let you know what the car is doing that you can't visually see, and you get used to the way force feedback works as opposed to a real car. It is obviously a little bit different because you don't have the feeling underneath you unless you have some sort of transducer or something. However, I noticed that as I was driving, and this is where force feedback, you can tell the difference, there seemed to be dead spots, and the best way to, I suppose, explain these are, there was definite wheel weight, but then no feedback on the road or the curbing or the grass, and it was as though I was driving on a perfectly smooth road that had nothing but rolling friction on it, which I know is not possible in real life, but that's the best explanation for what I was feeling. Outside of that, I was quite happy that we had the option to manually drive out of the pits, meaning we had to keep to the speed limit and time our acceleration on the pit lanes where you get to the pit line. This would be really interesting in a race, and this is something that I believe very few, if any, titles have to this level of detail. Visually, Project Cars 2 looks like an evolution of the original, which is to say it is very nice. Both the modelling is accurate for the cars and tracks, as well as high quality texturing, giving it a sense of photorealism, which is of course what they were aiming for. However, with that said, the environments around the tracks did not look all up to scratch, which meant it looked like a highly detailed track with a highly detailed car, or very highly detailed car, sitting in a not too detailed world. Not a huge point, but taking into account the likes of GT Sport and Forza 7, which have both come out around similar times, this is something that Project Cars 2 does fall short on. I then decided to go on to some racing, starting up a career mode, so I will talk a little bit about both of these, starting with the career mode first and then focusing more on the racing aspect. The way the career mode began was really nice. It showed how the driver would be able to progress by following and working their way up through various disciplines of their choice. In that sense, it sort of reminded me a little of Gran Turismo in the way that you had to progress through various challenges and in various cars or types of cars before being allowed to progress to the faster or more challenging vehicles. It did give a sense of having to work for your promotion into the higher series, and I do like gameplay mechanics that do that. I decided to start off with Formula cars and got into my first session with them. The AI turned up quite significantly, as well as making sure they had a decent amount of aggression. What I noticed here was that I was fairly on pace with them on the first couple of laps, but as I got used to the car I was driving, I absolutely blitzed them, and I needed to crank up the AI a little more, which then in the race did not pan out all too well, as they were still too slow. But I did start getting a feel for different cars, and the Formula car certainly felt different from the road cars I had tried. So I was really glad to feel that difference. However, to me it just didn't feel all too right. Don't get me wrong. Through qualifying and the race, I really felt the need to drive as fast as I possibly could without holding back. This was something I have only experienced on occasion in other racing games, but the feeling of pushing just seemed to be partly artificial. The car felt a little too, I'm not really sure what the right word is here, I suppose on edge, I guess? It felt like there was an artificial element to give it a feeling of being more on the limit than it actually was, which was a nice feeling if you take it for what it is, but it didn't feel all too right from a simulation perspective. Moving on from that, going into the next race of the career, the AI on the same settings left me far behind. Now this was odd for two reasons. One, the fact that in the previous race they were easily beaten, and two, I knew the second track far better than I knew the first, so I should have been on the pace a lot more easily. It was a very odd feeling there, and I know I was pushing the same amount. So to me this feels like the AI is not balanced as well as they would have hoped, and they end up being good on some tracks but quite poor on others. To test this further, I decided to take out some GT3 cars onto the Nurburgring in a setup that was almost identical to what I did when testing the original project cars. Well, how did it feel? The AI, they had spatial awareness, and I was able to go side by side with them through some of the corners, but then there were moments where they were just not brilliant at all, and it made driving with them a little bit difficult. They just seemed to hit you for no apparent reason. Now, admittedly, a couple of them were my fault. I lost control of the car, but something I had a complaint about in the original project cars was the AI would just smash straight into you. They would literally just smash straight into you. They don't do that here. They do slow down, they do try and avoid you, but it seems to take them a while to process this, and by the time they've thought it through, they don't have enough time to avoid you. So that's something that I found a little bit odd. I also made sure that I set the track up to start raining within a few moments of the race to see how the AI would respond to that, and also how the car would respond and the way I was driving. I certainly saw Live Track 3.0 system in action in the few tests that I did, and that basically gave a drier line where the cars were driving over, and it left the rest of the track far wetter and therefore a lot more slippery. So if you went offline, you would find your car slipping a lot more. I did like this, and it's something that my sim of choice is missing very much. Again, I will not say it felt completely realistic, but that seems to be down to the overall physics. At this point in testing, I felt that there was almost certainly an artificial element that was making the cars feel more on edge without them actually being on the edge. And this also gave me a chance to take another listen to the sounds, which again seem to be the same, fairly accurate, but boosted or adjusted in such a way to give the feeling of more than it actually is. And this is actually the same complaint I had in the original project cars, without the additional complaint of half the cars sounding good and the other half just not. I think all of them sounded equally okay, at least the ones I tested, but all of them had this feeling that they did not sound as real as I would want them, especially the lower powered cars such as the Subaru BRZ. Lastly, Project Cars now has new modes of racing and also driving with the introduction of rallycross and ice driving. I had to find out what it felt like, and for this part my standard was Dirt Rally because I felt that had the most complete physics model on gravel and snow and ice surfaces, even though it lacks somewhat on the tarmac side. And if you want to know more about that title, I do have a review episode dedicated just to that, so you can go check that out. But coming back to Project Cars 2, I just could not get into the rally style driving on here. Snow physics, they seemed okay, but not all too realistic in my opinion. The car just did not feel like it was on snow, and more so, it just felt like it was on low grip tarmac. It didn't feel all too fun to drive on, and I know from experience how fun snow can be to drive on. However, the real disappointment here was in the rallycross. I was expecting a really good feeling from the cars, but what I got was the exact same feeling of the car feeling unnecessarily on edge through some artificial means, but on the dirt that felt really bad. After a few laps, I started getting my driving adapted to driving on it, but it was not something I'd care to repeat, so I will be avoiding that for certain and sticking to Dirt Rally for all the rally and snow sort of driving. That brings me very nicely to my final thoughts on Project Cars 2. Do I feel like it is a fully fledged simulation experience with all the bells and whistles? No, I still don't think it is. Do I feel it is a fun title that gives you a pretty good sim experience without sacrificing the fun for more casual players? I actually do. It's got a lot going for it, particularly in the career mode, and whilst the AI is a little odd and certainly not the most advanced AI I have ever seen racing, it is still good enough that with some careful tweaking around you can have some decent racing with them and find yourself pushed lap after lap to ensure that you do not lock up, lose your position, go offline, and so on and so forth. With the photorealistic texturing and lighting and very good weather effects and time of day effects, as well as generally high frame rates even in the rain with multiple cars racing, it does have a lot of appeal to it, and I have to give it a 78 out of 100. So it's up a few points from the original Project Cars. Had this come out when the original did in terms of mechanics and physics, I believe it would have been a solid 85 or even pushing towards a 90, but there is a lot of very specific competition now that results in the lower score, unfortunately. The title has some way to go with regards to quashing bugs and refining the physics and gameplay, but if they are progressing like this, I have no doubt that Project Cars 3 could possibly end up being the title that sets the benchmark in every aspect, not just visuals and weather. Thank you very much for watching, and don't forget to check out the link in the description box below to purchase this from Games Planet and support me at the same time, as well as possibly pick up a nice discount. I'll see you guys in another episode of Total Reviews.